Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the ages of Apocalypse. We arrive at the final warping of reality by Apocalypse, fused with Scott Summers, and trying everything to keep the massive powers in play. Teams have been remade, battles waged differently, and even paths set on different futures, which is what we're looking at today with X-Men number 98. The cover has a whole bunch of mutants, but more familiar X-Men have all changed to very different degrees. Charles is wrinklier, Gambit and Colossus have gone gray along with Jean, but she still looks relatively young. Beast is as blue as ever, Storm seems to have become an elemental being, and who could forget the most popular X-Man, Floating Brain in a Jar. It's actually Dazzler. She said she wanted to be appreciated for her mind, and she took it way too far. Story by Alan Davis, scripted by Terry Cavanaugh, with art by Davis, Mark Farmer, Murray Yavins, Richard Starkings, and Comicraft. We begin with a hollow statue of Cyclops, which is surrounded by mutants from various planets. Their teacher explains that it's nearly a full century to the day since he sacrificed himself for the good of his team, the planet, and the galaxy. 100 years and the standard X uniforms haven't changed at all. Does the Xavier Institute just save money by keeping those suits for hand-me-downs? After Apocalypse's final defeat, Professor X led the previously enslaved Skrull mutants across space, in search of the freedom and dignity due to all sentient beings. They tried calling Optimus Prime to join them, but they couldn't get a hold of him. He was busy getting an oil change. Chuck and his spacefaring green pupils worked past the Skrulls' reputation as a warmongering race to become peacekeepers, apparently even introducing law and mercy to some worlds, stopping a few cosmic wars and natural disasters, and, with Beast's help, apparently outfitting Galactus with an energy replication device so he wouldn't need to feed on planets anymore. Of course, old habits are hard to break, so he still chomped on a few worlds after that, just for the tactile sensation of chewing up continents. Eventually, their efforts led to a home base for the Universal X Alliance, simply called X-World, where the present day of the future takes place. It acts as a safe haven for outcasts across reality. Outcasts from alternate realities and mirror dimensions have to sit in the corner in the basement next to the water heater. Jean Grey greets the teacher, Etha, apparently acquainted with her, but not having seen each other in quite some time.
But you still look incredible. Not a day older. Clean living, suspended animation, and most everything 21st century medicine has to offer. That's my secret, at least.
And on a completely unrelated note, I do not dye my hair no matter how I look on the cover. By this point, the children are already distracted from the lecture, because it's a lecture, but also because a ship has arrived with several X-Men. Fizz, now a general, greets an evolved Storm, who's all water, Colossus, whose head is the only part of him not armored up for some reason, either because of a coloring mistake or some new ability with his powers, and Charles, known as Founder X, who's basically wearing his hover chair now. He just flew in from the negative zone, and boy, is his everything tired! And Chuck wants to catch up on recent events.
Impossible! The real Colossus is even bigger than his life-size action figure.
Me fail English? That's impossible!
Part of me wants to criticize the practicality of a life-size action figure, but as a collector myself, I can't deny there'd definitely be a market for it, regardless of the era. And that's not even including the perverts.
And Storm's evolved. Again!
Says who?
Says your mother pod, morph mouth.
Oh good. Yo mama jokes made it to another century. I was so worried the future would be bereft of random and mean-spirited jabs at maternal caregivers. Firstly, if a life-size action figure isn't the size of the actual guy in real life, that sounds like false advertising. Also, it's kind of weird that a Skrull is calling someone else Morph Mouth, given, shapeshifters, but anyway. Etha admits defeat, dismisses the class, and heads off to a celebration, with Jean catching up later. For now, she mournfully speaks to her husband's hologram, about how Etha inspired the telepath to become a surrogate mother to hundreds of mutant kids over the years, but the pain of losing Scott never healed. She couldn't find another that measured up to him, so never remarried, and begins weeping at a memory of the two of them together. Maybe it wasn't so much failing to find someone as it was that
In a universe where dead characters are revived so often, she just kept waiting for Summers to pop back up. That probably makes the whole "till death do us part" portion of their wedding vows a little bit more complicated, though.
In a courtyard with many aliens mingling, apparently including what appears to be Thor and Silver Surfer, a representative from the planet Braxy Z is thanking Xavier for his people's rescuing of his water supply. Translated from Braxy Zish. And here I was expecting it to be translated from French. Old pals Iceman and Beast are catching up, with Bobby sporting a more intimidating look because of his time in a hostile sector of space, and McCoy talking about being part of a federation on a 5-year mission.
I mostly joined so I could exclaim that I'm a doctor, not a barber or zookeeper or some other profession, but no one seems to get the joke. Having serious regrets now.
And it looks like he's got a button for every team he's been associated with, which I guess includes the Fantastic Foursome at this point. Storm pops up to ask where to find Jean, and when Drake suggests the Hollow Museum, where she usually heads first, the elemental takes off in an uncharacteristically cold manner. And I guess Bobby would know. Piotr is introducing his twin great-grandchildren, who look just like the deceased Kitty Pryde, to Marrow and Gambit, who got married and are expectant great-grandparents themselves. A still young-looking rogue drops in, declaring she's finally gotten control over her absorption powers. News that makes Granny Bone Lady grasp her Cajun a little closer.
No dating.
You know, I was a little concerned that this future wasn't as optimistic and grand as it seems, but seeing Rogue is still young and hot, I think things are going to be just fine. I need a moment.
It's been a while since I've read comics from around this era, but the idea of Marrow and Remy together isn't entirely unfounded. If I recall correctly, they were getting a little closer, especially after alien tech affected her powers and physical appearance, but nothing outwardly affectionate or romantically actionable. Part of me wants to say that Sarah doesn't have anything to worry about since Gambit's old now and Rogue could have moved on, but it's not like there haven't been cases and stories where guys 50 or older get paired up with much younger women. Heck, she's been attracted to Magneto for crying out loud. But moving on. Sunfire chats up Cable, who's actually an older Nate Gray, who was talking with the Vision, wondering if there are any other Avengers we should be expecting. It was an honest mistake, since Shiro hasn't seen the Ascani Sun since shortly after the 12 incident, but the time-displaced original does make an appearance, traveling with Magneto and his Brotherhood, and, for unknown reasons, apparently letting the techno-organic virus encompass nearly his entire body.
He tried using homeopathic remedies, but St. John's wort didn't do anything, and he wasn't aware those healing crystals weren't supposed to be taken internally, and that just made things worse.
Lorna Dane, now going by Polarity, is also with Magnus, but ordered to step away from him by some X-Men security, making some reference to her history and her son. It almost evolves into a fight, but the two sides are forcibly separated by the magnetic manipulators. Eric is there to pay respect to Charles, though a subsequent chat with the Prof suggests yet another falling out between the two, giving Magneto a reputation that may warrant some zeal on behalf of the guards. Magnus views himself as free, living by no one's rules but his own. I could not reside in a galactic civilization fostered by genetically inferior castes of its species, and I am not alone in that, I assure you.
Is that racist?
Yes.
A little bit.
No.
The Master of Magnet had heard some rumors about his old frenemy's health, and Charles confirms he's dying, because mortality and all that.
Thanks to denial, I'm immortal.
That Futurama clip feels extra fitting, considering at this point Xavier has to be about as old as Professor Farnsworth.
Storm meets up with Jean in the museum, saying Charles has got days at most, hours maybe, and kept this from Phoenix out of guilt. He convinced Scott to come out of mutant hero retirement to face Apocalypse, and blamed himself ever since, just like Jean did. Even though they've worked together again, on and off, it's remained a largely work-related professional relationship, the loss of Scott, surrogate son to one and husband to another, remaining a wedge between them. Though their mentor wouldn't ask himself, before he goes to that mutant-exclusive academy in the sky, he wants Jean to forgive her. But she says it's herself she has trouble forgiving. And I would bet whose ever idea it was to have this other hollow statue of the merged psychopocalypse near Scott's Memorial.
Sure, historically relevant, but still in poor taste, space curator of the future.
Xavier is assuring his students that, like many of them, he's lived a very long life thanks to medical advancements, and his condition is terminal. Either he has something called the source virus that legacy inoculations weren't able to combat in time, or it's the legacy virus, a well-known disease targeting mutants, and source refers to the primary origins of said virus. Not clear as to what it could be, but anyway, a Shi'ar scientist may have a cure, a device from an advanced civilization older than humanity that is sure to cure any ailment and restore Charles to full health, if they can turn it on.
So you haven't found the power button, can't actually name the people that created it, but you're certain it's a cure-all chamber and not some giant microwave or interactive game console? Nope, nothing suspicious here.
Though they're not completely clueless on it, they've learned that it's powered by primal biokinetics, though no species has proven powerful enough to charge it, except the mutants of Earth, who have the most uniquely potential energies in the universe, meaning the X-Men could get this thing going. Chucky Geese doesn't like the idea of risking his people's lives on an untested doodad from ages past, but Colossus speaks for them all when he says they're on board. The Prof objects further, saying they don't understand, when his telepathy begins slurring and he falls over. Going into shock and fading quickly as Jean and Storm arrive, they place him inside the receptacle while several mutants use their powers to charge specific terminals, as directed by the scientist. It starts working as it begins activating, but more power is needed, so more mutants join in, only for Charles to warn them to stop, that they've been deceived, as the machine itself seems to be drawing out their mutant energies at this point.
This is why you read the terms and conditions before clicking OK. That's why they make them so long and complicated. That's how they get you.
And is Colossus dabbing? I mean, this was printed before that became a thing, but it's 100 years after that, so... Wow, this is going to make me confused, so I'm just going to skip that entire thing. The scientist then morphs into Apocalypse, having created the celestial machine to replace the one that got destroyed in his first attempt to steal energies. Still able to manipulate time and space, his first crack at tricking them, cited as both Uncanny 378 and Cable 77, didn't pan out, so he let them think he died, leading them into this future scenario he created, as cited in Wolverine 148, where they've been for years, promising this is no illusion.
While the lead-up to this was pretty obvious, it was still well-written and clever, so the reveal has actual impact. But even keeping in mind that reality is being twisted around, there is a continuity issue here.
The end of Uncanny and Cable were similar in some ways, but a little too different to have been just a single attempt. And unless he made one attempt for the X-Men and a separate one for Cable at the same time, it doesn't really fit what he says. Wolverine kind of fits, except for the implication that a lot of the X-Men died alongside most of Earth's heroes, and that it was stated how Nate Gray had defeated Apocalypse, which, like him becoming a villain afterwards, doesn't get referenced in any of the other comics. And though it's not mentioned, X-Men Unlimited saw the Horsemen of Apocalypse following the orders of a madman, but who are they working for if the guy that made them Horsemen was dead?
It really feels like only Uncanny, Unlimited, and X-Men work together as a singular altered timeline, with Wolverine more loosely so. It was a good plan, but I guess there were some communication issues with the writers of the other books.
With the living monolith in the apparatus channeling power into him, Apocalypse has godlike power over time and space, but Xavier counters that since he used trickery to get them to unleash their powers, he fails to understand his own. What he's become is largely outside conventional time and space, and outside his own vision.
This physical manifestation is only the tip of the iceberg, Apocalypse. Literally.
Unless there really is an iceberg involved, then you're misusing literally there, Chuck. And no, Bobby Drake does not count.
I thought you lived at the school.
The ancient tyrant corrects him, as he chose to take advantage of the frail, older versions of his enemies, then reverse time back to the end of the 20th century. This would essentially drain the X-Men's life in reverse, giving him an extra century's worth of bioenergies for him to conquer the galaxy without the merry mutants to stop him, which he begins demonstrating as our heroes are seen getting younger. Charles tries mind-linking everyone with Phoenix's help, but she has other ideas, psychically inspecting the depths of En Sabanur's mind and finding Scott, specifically memories of her time with him, which somehow informs her that he's somehow sabotaging his power circuit from within, looping the X-Men's energy back into them without the villain noticing.
Yes, I can totally see how she could pick up on all that by seeing a time they made out on the beach and flirted as teenagers.
Pocky's apparently running on fumes after twice shaking reality like an Etch-a-Sketch, and they all end up back in Egypt. The depleted first mutant blames Monolith's weakness for his failures, just as Cable launches what he hopes is one final attack to end his foe once and for all. However, Jean telekinetically stops him, allowing the ancient evil to escape with Monolith's help.
He's awful eager to do Apocalypse a solid after being wrongfully blamed, and, during the 12 storyline where he got so mad at being Apocalypse's pawn, he busted himself and everyone else out of their prisons? Or has he just conveniently forgotten all that?
Nathan is understandably angry, but Jean insists Scott is alive inside the monster. It's suggested it was merely a ploy, but she sensed him through their special rapport, speaking to her on a level in some way she can't describe.
Was it emojis? Plenty of people have trouble figuring out what emojis are supposed to mean when thrown into casual conversation. Hardly the time to play it hip, Summers.
She tries to get Xavier to back her up on this, but he didn't detect anything to confirm, and she begins crying that it really is over. A couple days later, Xavier is brooding out on the Institute grounds, not wanting Cyclops' death to be in vain. The team is reunited with the ones left at the mansion during all this, all seeming to be in good spirits despite, well, everything. Polaris took off with Magneto, the Skrull warriors and followers of the Monolith have up and vanished, and the Skrull mutants are too numerous to house at the school or anywhere else, so they'll need a new homeworld.
Why not let them start being intergalactic peacekeepers by giving them an entire state to protect? How about Florida? I keep hearing about this Florida man that's always causing all sorts of shenanigans.
A taxi pulls up as Jean walks out of the mansion with a suitcase, student and teacher looking at each other. Narration reminds us that Apocalypse said the future where the two went years without speaking to each other was no illusion, questioning if it was truly real or inevitable. In a kind of full circle to how this reality-shaking story began, Jean Grey gets into the cab and is driven away as the comic ends. A ghost now hangs between them in everything they do.
The ghost can see the tension, but is too socially awkward to do anything but linger and pretend to drink from an empty plastic cup. That was X-Men number 98, and the conclusion of Ages of Apocalypse. I'd say it was pretty good overall, but it had cohesion problems between parts 1 and 5.
I think they stuck the landing pretty well with this story. The key players have lived incredibly long, grown into lives that see them as better selves, and while there are still some problems in the universe, losses suffered, they more or less see a world that gets as close to realizing the dream of peaceful coexistence as they're likely to see. Though these problems could exist to keep things from looking too ideal, so nobody suspects Apocalypse's hand. Though probably not why Jean chose to stay single, that's likely meant as a natural decision she would make at this time. Someone could make a valid criticism that going 100 years without finding someone new to love is pretty outlandish, even in a world of alien super technology and improbable superpowers. However, I don't think there's really anything necessarily wrong with the romantic aspect, that he was her one and only, and couldn't find anyone else that measured up. Sure, it may be unrealistic to some, but this is essentially a fictional story within a fictional story.
Oh, sweet mercy. I just realized. Apocalypse almost took over everything with the power of self-indulgent fan fiction. I told you that stuff was no good.
Overall, I would say it was a pretty artful ruse on Pocky's part, playing on the X-Men's hearts and minds, and much like his initial plan in the 12, was pretty close to succeeding. Could have used more elaboration on Scott's internal interference, but perhaps that's meant to maintain the mystery of his existential status. Though it's the three central parts that kind of make me scratch my head over the arc as a whole. Maybe it was the communications thing, maybe someone thought they needed to give the writers of Cable, Wolverine, and Unlimited some basic notes and let them do whatever, but I think everything would have been much more improved, made stronger as a tale, with a few tweaks. Well, that ending with Cable realizing his wife's been dead is an emotional punch. Maybe don't end the issue with that. Rather, that the living monolith is somehow beaten, perhaps by Nathan's evil clone Strife, who takes over the Empire, and that's who takes over as High Lord, and many of the heroes die fighting instead of X-Man. And the X-team that Wolverine mourns in his title's contribution, maybe point out that it was a group of young mutants, most of whom he'd personally taught, who got in over their heads, and he wasn't there to help them. Perhaps you could have Strife defeated, dethroned, but not killed. So in X-Men Unlimited, that's who the Horsemen are working for. Either that, or establish that they're so committed to Apocalypse's vision that they fight in his memory and have plans to bring him back somehow.
It makes more sense than saying that Nate Gray slaughtered Earth's defenders, but is still somehow chummy with Xavier and crew in 2099. Time heals all wounds doesn't work in every scenario, you know.
As to that lingering question of that possible future happening, I wouldn't bet on it. It was founded on a scenario where Apocalypse went kablooey and was gone for good, whereas we're proceeding from a point where he's alive, weakened, and plotting his next move, and they're very much aware of it, meaning not so much is set in stone. But even if the characters were established to have understood this, I'm surprised there's no real fallout from the other X-Men on an emotional level. They experienced 100 years of loss, death, marriage, grandkids, but somehow seem perfectly fine.
Though that look that future Rogue shot future Gambit is curious. I prefer it to be simple, innocent flirtation between acquaintances that have a romantic history, because I am not a big fan of infidelity. Less so from heroes, and especially less so from heroes that I like.
Though the question seemed more focused on Jean and Charles's relationship, and it's hard to see it ending up the way they saw. Jean even hinted that she blamed herself for some reason, and she sensed Scott through a connection specific to the two of them, so it really doesn't make sense for her to blame Charles for not detecting anything, powerful as he is. But a little distance may be what they need before Scott inevitably returns. I liked the art in this issue, very smooth and vibrant colors, and while the characters were different from the cover, they are consistent in the book proper, except for this portion of Rogue's leg being blue, and a weird horizontal arc that doesn't seem to be part of anything, really.
This story might actually be better just reading the Uncanny and X-Men installments. It doesn't leave a lot of context for the elaborate details Apocalypse explains when he makes his final reveal, but it's less of a continuity headache. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.